In the shadowy world of espionage during World War II, female spies from the Allied powers infiltrated the ranks, gathered crucial intelligence, and sabotaged the Nazi war machine. These courageous women operated behind enemy lines, risking everything for the sake of freedom. Yet, what they endured upon capture by the Nazis is more disturbing than many might imagine. The treatment of female spies by the Nazis was marked by a chilling brutality that went beyond the norms of warfare. These women seen not only as enemies, but as betrayers of the Nazi ideal of womanhood, faced torture and interrogations designed to break both body and spirit. In today's video, you'll learn about seemingly ordinary women who, because they were born at a time when the world badly needed heroes, stepped up to fight Nazism, despite knowing that the odds of being captured were very high. Most of the World War II spies and resistors that you'll learn about today were women from nations at war with or occupied by the Nazis. But the first woman was German. Her name was Libertas, Liberty, and she and her husband, Harro Schulze-Boysen, were members of an elite club, the German nobility. Libertas, called Libs by her friends, came from an old Prussian noble family. Her mother was a princess of a small German principality before World War I ended the German monarchy and much of the nobility's influence. Her husband, Harro's grand-uncle, was one of the German Navy's greatest heroes, Grand Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, 1849 to 1930, and who the Nazis named one of their largest and most famous ships after. It's hard to describe the German society in which Harro and the Libs lived. He was born in 1911 and she in 1913, so their memories of the time when the Kaiser and Germany's nobility were at the very top of Germany's social ladder were likely few. But even after World War I and up until, and even through, the Hitler era, German nobility, especially those from Prussia, largely still lived a life of wealth, privilege, and, to a certain degree, of deference. Even Hitler in his years before power would often bow to important members of the nobility. By all accounts, Harro was a focused, extremely intelligent, and intense young man. He grew up with many of the traditional ideas of the German nobility and was conservative in his youth. In the 20s, he joined a variety of conservative and nationalist organizations. He had been arrested and mistreated by the French forces who occupied the Saar region of Germany for a time following World War I. In the first 2 years of the 1930s, Harro belonged to Nazi organizations, but spent time looking deep into Hitler's writings and speeches and decided they were utter nonsense. That, combined with the influence of liberal thinkers he met in England and France before Hitler came to power, and a careful look around at what was really happening in Germany, turned Harro into an anti-Nazi. Libertas was a completely different type of person. She was intellectually curious and quite intelligent, but was more fun-loving than Harro, whom she married in July 1936. Fun-loving meant just that. She loved to sail, be out in nature as much as possible, and gather friends for picnics in the woods or by the water. Later, Lib's fun-loving nature was used against her. Harro and Libs had an open marriage, but it seems Libertas was more of a free thinker than her husband. In jail and court, the Nazis called her every name in the book and negatively compared her to their ideal German mother, a loyal, quiet, submissive housewife. In the 2 years before the Nazi regime, Harro was editor-in-chief of a magazine called Der Gegner, the opponent, which was decidedly anti-Nazi. He had traveled widely and had made friends and acquaintances in liberal, intellectual, and political circles in other Western European countries. In August 1933, just months after the Nazis came to power, the Gestapo raided Der Gegner, sealed its offices, and arrested the entire staff. In prison, Harro's Jewish friend and co-worker Harry Erlanger was tortured and killed in front of him. Harro was also questioned and beaten badly, but the intervention of an influential family member caused him to be released. His family got him a place in a flying school, which taught its students to fly gliders, as small aircraft, meaning fighter planes, were banned in Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. When Harro married Libertas in 1936, he was an officer in the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. His politics had not changed, but they were hidden. Libertas and her family often vacationed in Sweden, where they also had connections to the Swedish nobility and high social circles. One of the people she knew, at least as an acquaintance, was Hermann Göring, who fled to Sweden after Hitler's failed 1923 beer hall putsch in Munich. Later, after he became head of the Luftwaffe and Hitler's number 2 man, the Reichsmarschall, the Schulze-Boyens, were actually invited to parties at his estate, Karenhall, named after his first wife, a Swedish countess, who is friends with Libertas' parents. Libertas worked for the German branch of the vast Hollywood movie company Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. But as the Nazis took over, More and more scripts sent to Libertas for review before dubbing or subtitles were added were rejected by the propaganda ministry, run by Joseph Goebbels. MGM's management in the US was largely Jewish, which Joseph Goebbels did not like. By 1941, she worked for a branch of the propaganda ministry, collecting photos and information about life at the front for a documentary to be made after the war. However, in addition to receiving letters in praise of the Nazi regime or the progress of the war, Libs also received letters telling her what was really happening, especially in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. One picture she received described the massacre of Jews, but under the guise of poetry about hunting rabbits. With the poem was a picture of an SS man about to bash a baby's head against a wall. By 1941, both Harrow and Libs had met a wide circle of people who believed as they did. To history, they became known as the Red Orchestra, and were alleged to be all communists, but this was a name the Gestapo called them before they were caught. Most of the members of the Red Orchestra were traditional or perhaps a bit more left-leaning liberals, and would have been shocked by the realities of Stalin's Russia, but the name stuck. Throughout the war years, until they and most of their comrades, who likely numbered in the dozens, were discovered, the Red Orchestra published underground papers and pamphlets. They pasted thought-provoking stickers on Nazi propaganda posters, asking people if they believed all the Nazi lies. And some of them, including Harrow, reported on German troop movements, resource issues, and morale to a man they knew would get the information to Moscow. Later in the war, Gestapo radio intercepts of this man would lead to the arrest of most of the Red Orchestra. In the early part of the war, they had tried to make contact with British and French intelligence agencies and were rejected, possibly because of the suspicion they were German double agents. In 1942, the Gestapo finally got a picture of most of the Red Orchestra organization. Arrests of people with very little to do with the Schulze-Boysens and their important friends at the heart of the group led to bits and pieces that, put together with significant radio intercepts and Gestapo informers, one of whom heard Libertas say, at a party while a bit under the influence, "I'm part of the resistance," led to the arrest of Harrow on August 31st, 1942. A week later, Libertas was arrested on a train headed towards Munich. She was going to lie low with friends there, and while she didn't know her husband had been arrested, she suspected and was told by insiders that the Gestapo was monitoring both her letters and her phone. She was put in a cell in Gestapo headquarters, the notorious 8 Prinz Albrechtstrasse. Today, the building is a museum about the Gestapo and SS and a memorial to their victims. But then it was the most notorious place in all of Germany. She and Harrow were interrogated almost daily, though he received much rougher treatment than she did. Libs was also given a cellmate, and she fell for the oldest trick in the book. She admitted everything she knew in a kind of confession before the death she was sure would come. And of course, that's all the Nazis needed. A few months after their arrest and short sham trial, Harrow was executed by guillotine. An hour and a half later, Libs was killed by the same blade. But in a way, the worst was yet to come. When her family went to retrieve her body, they were told it was not possible. Her body had been sent to the anatomy department of the university in Berlin, where she was dissected like a lab rat by a Nazi true believer and doctor named Hermann Stiefel. Historians debate how much the information provided to the Soviets by the Red Orchestra helped the anti-Nazi war effort, but no one can deny their courage. Behind enemy lines, Zoya Kozmodemyanskaya was 18 years old when she was beaten, tortured, and hanged by the Germans during their invasion of the Soviet Union. Zoya, whose name means life, had committed herself heart and soul to fighting the Nazis in any way she could. She likely knew that she would not return alive, just like her hero, a woman soldier for the Red Army in the Russian Civil War who was captured by anti-communist forces, tortured, and killed. Zoya was a partisan, a guerrilla fighter who fought behind German lines. Life for captured regular Soviet soldiers was brutal, and if sent to Germany or Poland to work in the camps, it was more often fatal than not. But there was a chance of returning. Captured partisans could expect nothing but torture and death. Zoya wasn't recruited or ordered to become a partisan. She volunteered. Her family had long ties to the Russian Orthodox Church. In the atmosphere of Moscow, as the communists solidified their control and Stalin began his march to the top, the church and the clergy, as well as anyone suspected of being true believers, were rounded up, often never to be seen again. 1929. As Stalin solidified his power, Zoya's family moved to a small town about 300 miles southeast of the capital to lay low and see how the winds blew. In 1930, the family moved back to Moscow. Some suspect that her father had been taken by the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, and was threatened and possibly tortured, then turned informer on the religious community there. If that was the case, he was not alone. Moscow was a city of informers in Stalin's era. When they moved back to Moscow, Zoya was only 7 or 8. 8 years later, she joined the Kosmomol, the Soviet Youth League, and from all accounts, both from her family and the government, she was a model communist. By October 1941, Hitler's armies had been tearing through Soviet defenses along the 1,200-mile front. Poorly led and equipped, mainly because of Stalin's purge of the Red Army in 1937-1938, large formations of the Red Army were surrounded and either destroyed or surrendered. Hundreds of thousands of men at a time gave themselves up. Most would never make it home. The war in the Soviet Union was brutal beyond most people's ability to imagine. On the front lines and behind them, the German army and the SS, including the infamous Einsatzgruppen, who were charged with killing every Jewish person they could find, destroyed thousands of villages and towns. Those they did not wipe out were subjected to a harsh regimen of labor and oppression. Despite invading the USSR with 3 million troops, the size of the country meant that vast areas would be unoccupied, perfect for partisan or guerrilla warfare. For instance, the swampy forested area on the border of today's Belarus and Russia is about the size of Texas. Yeah, you heard that right, Texas. Or the entire territory of France. But being a partisan didn't mean hiding out in the swamps and forests waiting for the tide of war to turn. It meant spying in villages, observing troop movements, seizing German troops and suspected Russian collaborators, and, on occasion, conducting raids on German outposts, whether located in the countryside or in villages. Zoya volunteered for the partisans in October and likely received very little training. The situation at the time was so dire that there simply wasn't time to train partisans or soldiers properly. Those who survived, through luck or skill, were counted on to teach recruits in the field. Just a month after volunteering, Zoya and 2 other partisans, Boris Kremov and Vasily Klubkov, were sent to the village of Petryshevo to destroy anything of value they could, trucks, radios, etc. In the already freezing Russian weather, the Germans had seized huts and houses in the villages as well. The small group was ordered to burn them to the ground. Zoya had already had one similar mission under her belt when she was ordered to Petryshevo, about 60 miles west of Moscow. The missions the partisans undertook were dangerous in the extreme. By the time of her last mission, Zoya's unit had been reduced from 20 to 8, some of whom wanted to return to Moscow. Zoya and her comrades were to approach from different directions, setting fire to whatever they found was useful to the Germans. Unfortunately, Vasily Klubkov, a teenager himself, was captured and beaten by the Germans. Sometime later, the Germans captured Zoya near some trucks on the other side of the village. She insisted her name was Tanya and that she was from the village but had no papers to prove it. She was then brought face to face with Zubkov, who, according to all accounts, was a not too bright and terribly frightened teenager. It's likely that Krenov was killed, captured, and executed, or sent to a POW camp where he was never heard from again. Given the nature of Soviet reporting and the chaos of the time, facts about Krenov are hard to find. But for Zoya, hell was beginning. To villagers who were summoned outside to watch what happened to anyone who opposed the Germans, it seemed like the Nazis had already decided she was guilty, and the torture that she endured outside in the snow in sub-zero with no shoes was not to extract information, but just for the revenge and fun. What questions the Nazi did ask about partisan activity in the area were not answered. For 3 hours, the Nazis held lighters and torches to her face and body. They beat her within an inch of her life, but she never lost consciousness. Then she was brought to a makeshift gallows built by the Germans. Official Soviet accounts of her last words are likely untrue, that she died singing the praises of Stalin and that Stalin would come soon to avenge her and all Soviet people, etc. But villagers and German soldiers who survived the war and gave their account of what happened say that she said something along these lines. "Hey comrades, why are you looking so sad? Be brave. Fight. Beat the Germans. Burn. Wipe them out. I'm not afraid to die, comrades. It is happiness to die for one's people. You hang me now, but I'm not alone. There are 200 million of us. You can't hang us all. They will avenge me." The Germans left her body hanging for 3 weeks. The villagers were forbidden to go near it, and one night, a drunken German soldier cut off one of her breasts. The body remained there for another 2 weeks. Vasily Klubkov was apparently allowed to escape. One belief is that the Germans sent him back so he would become an informer, but this seems unlikely. He may have just been let go because he identified Zoya, but we'll likely never know. Usually, captured partisans were often killed on the spot or sent to the rear for further questioning. What we do know is that on his return, he was taken by the Soviet secret police, questioned roughly, admitted to what he had done, signed a confession, and was shot in the back of the neck. Zoya was posthumously proclaimed a hero of the Soviet Union, and even today, statues of her dot Russia. Her brother, Shura, was killed in combat in Germany in the last weeks of the war, and he too was proclaimed a hero of the Soviet Union for heroism under fire. This has been History on Fleek. Thank you for watching.